Welcome to Magnificat TV News, dedicated to offering news of the Church. It is Wednesday, March 2, 2022. The Pope has canceled his participation in the Mediterranean Bishops' Congress and the Ash Wednesday celebration due to knee problems. Pope Francis has called the whole Church to a day of fasting and prayer. It is today, on Ash Wednesday, to pray for peace in Ukraine. Polish bishops have sharply condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine and offered their help to the thousands of refugees fleeing from Ukraine. Polish bishops call on German bishops to return to the faith of the Church and stay away from heresy promoted by the German Synod. The Vatican has withdrawn its diplomatic staff from Hong Kong and Taiwan in a further step of reaching out to Communist China. The Holy Father did not attend the Mediterranean Bishops' Congress and canceled his participation in the Ash Wednesday celebrations due to knee problems.
Due to an acute gonalgia, which for the doctor has prescribed a period of further rest of the leg, Pope Francis will not be able to travel to Florence on Sunday, February 27th. As made known by the Holy See Press Office, this is the reason why the Holy Father did not participate this Sunday in the meeting of bishops and mayors of the Mediterranean. At the Congress, a meeting was scheduled with the participating bishops and mayors, with families of refugees and displaced persons to conclude with the celebration of Holy Mass and the Angelus prayer. Similarly, the Vatican Press Office announced that due to this acute knee pain, Pope Francis will not be able to preside over the celebrations of Ash Wednesday, today, March 2nd.
Pope Francis has called all Catholics to a day of prayer and fasting today, on Ash Wednesday, to pray for peace in Ukraine.
The Holy Father expressed his sorrow at what is happening in Ukraine and asked for the war to end as soon as possible. To this end, he has called for a day of prayer and penance, asking for peace to be held today, Ash Wednesday. On the other hand, the director of the Holy See Press Office, Matteo Bruni, informed that Pope Francis visited on Friday, February 25th, the headquarters of the Embassy of the Russian Federation to the Holy See located in Via della Conciliazione, Rome. During his visit, which lasted more than half an hour, explained Matteo Bruni, the Pope wanted to express his concern about the war in Ukraine in view of the evolution of events following the Russian invasion of Ukrainian territory that began in the early hours of February 24th. The Holy Father is closely following the delicate situation in this Eastern European country.
The Catholic Church in Poland has condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine and has offered to take in refugees fleeing from Ukraine.
I express my solidarity with all Ukrainians, both in Poland and Ukraine, assuring them of our closeness, our prayers, and our readiness to help them, wrote the president of the Polish Bishops' Conference, Archbishop Stanislaw Gadekik. Archbishop Gadekik also asked that both this Sunday and on Ash Wednesday, after each Mass, collections be organized to raise funds, which, through Caritas Poland, will go to help refugees. In connection with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, on behalf of the Polish Bishops' Conference, I strongly condemn Russia's actions, recognizing them as an unacceptable and shameful act of barbarism directed against the sovereignty and freedom of an independent state. As the Church in Poland, we wish to provide our brethren with material aid, the bishop said, The aid will be provided gradually and systematically through our charitable institutions, including the Eastern Church Relief Team of the Polish Bishops' Conference.
A tough letter has been written by the Polish bishops to the German bishops, asking them to turn away from heresy and return to the faith of the Church.
The Polish bishops, through a harsh letter from their president, Monsignor Gadadik, have strongly criticized the Synodal Assembly of the Church in Germany and have asked the bishops and the Catholic faithful of their neighboring country to return to the traditional teachings of the Church. The president of the episcopate expresses in his letter his deep concern about the path the German reform is taking and contradicts the central arguments and decisions of the synodal way. Faithful to the teaching of the Church, we must not yield to the pressure of the world or to the models of the prevailing culture. Let us avoid repeating worn-out slogans and standard claims such as the abolition of celibacy, the priesthood of women, communion for the divorced and civilly remarried, or the blessing of same-sex couples, the Polish Archbishop said. One of the temptations of the Church today, the Polish prelate said, is to constantly confront the teachings of Jesus with current advances in psychology and social sciences. The findings on homosexuality are comparable to the scientific positions on racism and eugenics of the early 20th century, alluding to Nazi theories. Changing attitudes towards sexuality would be based on ideological deceptions, he added. Despite the outrage, ostracism, and unpopularity, the Church cannot agree with, bless, or promote a false image of humanity. Many Catholics in Germany live under the pressure of public opinion, which causes them an inferiority complex, but we must not give in to this. In the same way, the loss of the faithful and the decrease in the number of priests must not lead to business thinking taking hold in the Church, and the maxim, there is a shortage of personnel, we must lower the criteria for recruitment, becoming the guiding principle.
Although relations have not been severe, the Vatican has ordered the withdrawal of personnel from the nunciatures in Hong Kong and Taiwan in order to please Communist China.
The Vatican diplomatic missions in Hong Kong and China have not been officially closed, but all their diplomatic personnel have been evacuated. Without any official explanation, the Holy See asked its representatives in Hong Kong and Taiwan to withdraw from these two countries. A decision that would seem to reflect the Holy See's willingness to appease Beijing by taking a measure that remains radical. The diplomatic missions are therefore not closed, but this initiative comes as a surprise in a context in which the Holy See has been criticized for its excessive concessions to the Chinese authorities. The move comes on the eve of the commemoration of 80 years of diplomatic relations between Taiwan and the Vatican. While the Holy See still recognizes Taiwan as a legitimate country, the People's Republic of China, ruled by the Chinese Communist Party, considers it a province in rebellion.
Our editorial this week is dedicated to commenting on the war in Ukraine and the Church's effort to bring peace.
War is back. In fact, it has never left since the Second World War. The so-called peripheral wars have not ceased, some as big as the wars in Iraq or Afghanistan, but war has returned to Europe, and a shiver of terror runs through the world, not only Europeans. A shiver of terror at the possibility of a devastating nuclear war. Perhaps that is why Europe's allied nations, the United States and its European allies, have decided not to apply any further measures, for example, the use of force to defend Russia's invasion of Ukraine, an invasion that is the invasion of one independent country by another, and that is unacceptable. But this fear of nuclear war has possibly been one of the reasons why the Allies have not entered, at least so far, into the war and have left Ukraine alone. They have decided to take economic measures. Well, economic measures against Russia, measures that, according to what a Russian ambassador said, Russia did not care about. Possibly Putin has laughed out loud at these measures. They have not even dared to press what is known as the economic nuclear button, that is the exclusion of all Russian banks from the SWIFT code, the code that allows all international economic transactions. They have not even come to that. And of course, they have not sent their young people to fight and die in Ukraine. Perhaps because their young people would not be willing to fight and die even for their own countries. But we have to take into account some things. We have to take into account that history cannot be suppressed by a purely political decision. Ukraine has been united to Russia for many years. There has been a continuous flow of population. There is an important part of the Ukrainian population, and not only in the part called the Donbass, an important part of the Ukrainian population that feels linked to Russia. I give an example. The vast majority of Ukrainians are of Orthodox religion. A few years ago, a sector of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church declared itself independent from the Moscow Patriarchate, from the Russian Patriarchate, with the support of the Patriarchate of Constantinople, the Patriarch who has, let's say, honorary superiority over all the Orthodox of the world. That has caused a rupture between Moscow and Constantinople. Well, but the vast majority of the Ukrainian Orthodox monasteries, parishes, priests, and faithful, the vast majority are still in the section of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church section loyal to Moscow, and only a minority has remained independent. Let's say, in the National Orthodox Church recognized by Constantinople. The vast majority of the Ukrainian Orthodox, which is the vast majority, almost the entire population, remains faithful to Moscow, remains faithful to Russia. I believe this is very significant. It seems to me that it should have been taken into account in that country, and that it should also serve as a lesson for other countries, because, for example, it can happen, as it can happen in Catalonia, that the majority oppresses the minority in the question of language without going very far, and although numerically they have the possibility of doing it from the electoral and democratic point of view, but that generates a deep division in the population, which can be one of the causes of what is happening at this moment. I insist, it is not acceptable for a foreign country to be conquered by another, but we have to see everything and that is happening and why it is happening. The Catholic Church, both of Latin and Greek rite in Ukraine, which is a minority, has always been in favor of the autonomy, the independence of Ukraine, and distancing from Russia and of getting closer to the West. But in the end, they are a minority. They are a little more in those areas of Western Ukraine, close to Poland, because that was part of Poland, of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and its capital is a beautiful city that in a way could even compete with its capital, with Krakow. Well, there are some ties, some strong links between the area of Ukraine and Poland, and therefore the West, which are also thinking that that area of the country does not want to join Russia, but to look much more to the West. What are the lessons we should draw from this war? The first is to do what the Pope has asked for, fasting and prayer. The Pope has asked for Ash Wednesday, but we don't have to wait for that moment. The first lesson is that our weapons are fasting and prayer, and we believe in them. The second lesson is to do just what the Polish Church is doing, so much criticized, just as her country is criticized by the lazy Westerners who are not lifting a finger. The Polish Church, collaborating with her government, has already prepared to welcome the thousands and thousands of Ukrainian refugees who are entering their country. That is an effective collaboration to pray and to help the fugitives, the refugees, because in the end what matters is that suffering, the suffering of that people. The third lesson that Western politicians should learn is to realize what Putin has been doing in recent years in his country. Putin has been strengthening Russia morally, while the West favors even forces and makes abortion a right and harasses doctors who want to make conscientious objection. Instead, Putin has been doing the opposite, trying to stop people from having abortions, completely rejecting gender ideology, supporting the Orthodox Church in all its aspects, even in the economic aspect, receiving therefore also the support of that church. He has been morally strengthening his people. It doesn't seem to me that he's a useful champion of Christian culture, but it seems to me that he's a politician who knows what he has to do before starting a war. While this rich, indolent West lives destroying its roots and therefore turning Europe into a ripe fruit that is at the mercy of any adventurer to take it over, are young Europeans willing to fight and die for their homelands? Western Europe, I mean. I'm sure that the Polish people are, and the Hungarians too. Curiously, the two countries that have refused to enter the diabolical circuit of the gender ideology. The Poles, the Hungarians, love their countries and are ready for anything. Surely they are not the only ones, but truly the rest are ready to go to war to defend their independence, the independence of their country if it was attacked and conquered. It seems to me that what most of them want is to continue with their vices, sex, anything there is, drugs, alcohol, abundant, to be allowed to sleep an eternal siesta without anyone bothering them, and they do not care if they call them Spanish or French or English or Germans or be called Russians. They just want to be allowed to live comfortably and do not care about anything else. At least that is my impression, and I insist that this is what weighed heavily in the decision taken by the government to look at what is happening in neighboring Ukraine with a certain distance. European politicians should learn to strengthen the moral roots of their people if they do not want to wake up one day with tanks from a neighboring country walking through their streets. See you next week, God willing.
If you would like to keep up to date with what is happening in the church, you can visit our news page, www.Magnificat TV. See you next week, God willing.